So we already covered how to use fast renderers to make our application render a little bit more efficiently. We talked about removing the renderer, so we only have the native UI, the native UI component, whether it is a button, an entry, or a label. Let's now talk about another new thing in Xamarin Forms, which is layout compression, that is going to make our UI a little bit more efficient as well. Again, Xamarin has been very focused on making Xamarin Forms as efficient as possible, so it becomes even more a better solution to multi-platform development. So let's talk about layout compression. Without layout compression, one of our UIs may look like this. We have the content page, and of course we are going to define a content, and we may have things like stack layout or a grid or another kind of elements that don't necessarily show into the UI. And it is very important to understand which elements show and which don't. We know that there is a stack layout because all of the elements that we start defining inside of it are going to be stacked one below the other. And we know that there are grids because we can divide these grids in columns and in rows. But they don't really show at the end of the day, unless we define a background to it, so they have color. Or if maybe we have to respond when some event happens on them, for example, when a grid is pressed. So then those elements become parts of the UI when they have to be pressed, or when we have to respond to a certain event, or when they have some color. Otherwise, they don't show in the UI. So Xamarin has come up with a very neat idea of layout compression that allows you to have those elements removed so your UI is even thinner. And by thin, I just mean that it's lighter and that it's more efficient. And the UI is still going to look the exact same way. But at the time of rendering the UI, it's going to get rid of those elements that are not being displayed, such as stack layouts or grids that don't have color, and just keep those elements that do show in the UI, for example, labels, entries, images, etc. This again is another way of making your UI a little bit more efficient. So having talked about how this is going to work, let's jump into Visual Studio and configure one of our pages to use layout compression. So here I am on Visual Studio, and what I'm displaying is the main page of our travel record app. I have to the right how it is being displayed on iOS, and we know that this is going to be very similar on Android. Currently, we have one stack layout that is entirely blank. It, of course, has images and entries and two buttons, but it has no color, and we don't have to respond to any action, to any event that happens on the stack layout. So it is as if it didn't even exist. But of course we need it because it helps us stack all of our elements together. Now with newer versions of Xamarin, we can use layout compression to make this stack layout stop being rendered, but still keep how it works. And the only thing that we have to do is define one of its properties that is going to be inside of compressed layout. Notice that we now see this element because remember that in the previous lecture we updated to a newer version of Xamarin Forms. And inside of this, we are going to see the property is headless. We are simply going to have to set this to true. And you may not see any changes. In fact, in the Xamarin Forms previewer, you see the exact same layout. But when this runs, the stack layout is not going to be rendered. All it's going to be rendered is the elements inside of it. The user interface is going to remain looking the same way, so no worries there, but your UI is going to be much lighter as it is now going to ignore the stack layout, or it's just going to stop rendering it. So now that you know how to do this, that is, by the way, very simple. I encourage you to use the isHeadless property of the compressed layout and set it to true in all of those layouts, especially those that are very nested, meaning that we have a lot of containers like stack layouts and grids, etc. So your UI becomes much lighter without changing the actual UI. So we have taken a look at two things that you can now do with Xamarin Forms that allows you to create much lighter applications, especially when it comes to the user interface. Starting in the next lecture, we're going to focus on creating applications with Xamarin Classic, which will allow you to use platform-specific functionality in a very similar way that you would on Xcode for iOS or on Android Studio for Android, but with the advantage that you will still be using C#, so you can share some of this code.